Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into a supersized Bet the Board podcast, Super Bowl 58 edition. All the long hours, toiling over numbers through the offseason, the preseason podcast, the regular season, the playoff games. They all come to a head Sunday in lovely Las Vegas, and we've got you covered for the big game. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Our listeners will be sad that football is over, but I know you and I are looking towards a little bit of R&R.
Man, a week off. I feel refreshed, rejuvenated, ready to attack Super Bowl 58 here, buddy boy.
Well, we may have to change that tune. An hour of recording a podcast may change your very way that you want to approach it. But two teams that I think before the season started would not have shocked anybody if we saw them renewing acquaintances playing for the Lombardi Trophy. In the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. Didn't look like both of them were necessarily going to have a path to get to this big game. When we watched them on Christmas, it was the Kansas City Chiefs stubbing their toe, to say the least, against the Las Vegas Raiders. The 49ers on a grandiose stage losing outright to the Baltimore Ravens. But here they both are taking slightly different paths through the playoffs to get here. When you look at the Chiefs, they've been a dominant freight train to this juncture of the postseason, leading their three games for a combined 2 hours plus. Meanwhile, the 49ers, well, they've made life difficult on themselves, needing second-half comebacks, not only to knock off the Green Bay Packers as a double-digit favorite, but also erasing a 17-point deficit in the NFC Championship against the Lions. When we look at history that's on the line, Patrick Mahomes, 14 career playoff wins, tied with Terry Bradshaw, John Elway, and Peyton Manning for the third most by a quarterback in NFL history. Only Tom Brady and Joe Montana have won more playoff games. You look at the Chiefs, looking to be the first team to win back-to-back Super Bowls since the 2003-2004 Patriots accomplished that feat. And Payne, something that's eluded the 49ers since 1994, their sixth Super Bowl win hangs in the balance, which would tie the Patriots and Steelers for the most by any franchise. We'll see if they can finally get over the hump. When we look at the number on this game, the 49ers, we're going to call a 2-point consensus favorite, although there are some 2.5s. Total on the game, 47.5. We did see a couple of books open 3 on Sunday when the conference championship games were over. Those numbers didn't last. Not a whole heck of a lot of movement on the total. But when we look at the top line markets before we get into some of the X's and O's, what have you seen thus far?
Nothing.
See, that's an easy question. It's an easy question for you. I gave you a low-hanging fruit to allow you to get your confidence back and watch that ball going through the hoop since we haven't podcasted for 2 weeks.
You think about this game, and the look-ahead line got beat up a little bit, right? There was some offerings of +3, and those got wiped out. And Chris was one of the few to reopen the Super Bowl line 3, and to your point, just it did not last. I would say by the time we woke up Monday and actually had a pretty solid consensus line, we were in that 1.5, 2 range, and there hasn't been much fluctuation in the consensus price, but how we've kind of gotten here, there's been the ping pong back and forth. We've seen a battle take shape in the market where folks have got out and laid cheap money line prices on the 49ers, right? -120, 1.5. And then when we got to like 2.5, there was some resistance. There was some buyback. It'll be interesting to see where that kind of unfolds leading up until kickoff. Would assume Mahomes and the points. It's too much to pass up for some, but it does kind of feel like a little bit of a lazy narrative. And what caught my attention is one of the first things you said leading off this podcast was that the Chiefs have been dominant in the postseason. And I would echo those sentiments, I think, for the Dolphins game for sure. You don't want to take away what they did in that game, but certainly Miami was playing with less than a full deck of cards there. And the Buffalo performance was, I thought, exceptional. You could argue it was maybe the best performance of the season.
Offensively,
And
no doubt about it.
The final score certainly not indicative of what transpired on that field. I believe we talked about it ahead of the conference championship games. If you looked at some of the underlying metrics, you could have made a case for the Chiefs winning that game by about 13 points. I thought defensively, too, the scheme, right? It was like, hey, we're going to allow Buffalo to run a little bit here, and we're going to turn Josh into check down Charlie. And ultimately, it led to a little tighter game than it should have been, and had Diggs caught that ball, that style of play probably leads to the Chiefs losing. I think the interesting debate of how we got here is maybe what you think about the performance in Baltimore last week. I'm interested, not last week, but 2 weeks ago, rather. I'm interested to hear how you kind of processed that game, because I do believe how you viewed it, how you went back and uncovered some things and absorbed the data might lead you to thinking about this game differently. So, like, what did you make of the Baltimore game?
So I guess I should have prefaced when I said dominant in terms of how many minutes that the Chiefs have led for, because yes, dominance would not be the word that I would use to describe how they looked against the Baltimore Ravens, other than the opening few drives where they were able to build themselves a lead. And I don't want to say sit on that lead, but that's more or less what it felt like, forcing Baltimore to play from behind. But you look at the Chiefs, and they weren't pushed in that contest. Defensively, they were challenged in the second half. I don't think the scoreboard did any justice to the Baltimore Ravens' ability to move the football once they went back to some of their basics to a lesser extent. But, you know, when you go back and watch that game, and I've done so multiple times, I thought that had more to do with Baltimore going away from script early in the contest than it did the Chiefs coming out and doing what they do best. In as much as Baltimore goes, hey, we're not going to run the football. I mean, was never a concerted effort to get designed runs for Lamar Jackson. We didn't get a steady dose of Gus Edwards and Justice Hill like we anticipated against that interior defensive line for the Kansas City Chiefs. And Lamar Jackson held the ball for an inordinate amount of time and looked reluctant to throw the football when things started to open up for him, almost like we saw in the first half against the Houston Texans when Todd Monken then scrapped the script, said, hey, we're going to get the ball out of Lamar's hand, and we saw him go from about 3.5 seconds in terms of dropbacks to getting it out much quicker, and it was history repeating itself in that particular spot. To your point, that game looks significantly different if Zay Flowers doesn't completely lose his mind on one drive, ends up reaching the ball across the goal line. It's a 3-point game, and then you begin to wonder, okay, can Kansas City regain some of that offensive swagger they had early after Mike McDonald made the adjustments he needed to, went away from zone, decided that he wasn't going to let Travis Kelce eat for the better part of 4 quarters and have 3,000 receptions, and went to man-to-man. Fortunately for Patrick Mahomes, he didn't have to try and throw the ball into tight windows. With Kansas City leading, he was able to just throw the ball away, and they felt more than comfortable with what their defense was able to do on the other side.
Yeah, I think that's the crazy part, is for anyone, like let's just, you think about that line, extremely sharp Ravens money, regardless of what you've seen on social media and who was, on the Chiefs, right? The line, the projection of where that line was going by many, completely off. And, after the game, doubling down of what was the right side and the wrong side. And you don't want to turn this into like crabbing on coaches because Harbaugh, Monken, and McDonald are going to forget more football than we'll ever know. But the game plan against Kansas City was equivalent of, convincing us water isn't wet and the sun isn't hot. It was just like the most head-scratching game plan that I think I've seen. And it was weird. It's like on offense, the Ravens tried beating a Chiefs defense that was like, just, they're super elite through the air. And so like the idea that you're going to beat them through the air consistently was a little bit mind-boggling. I know the Chiefs' run defense has improved, and touch on that here in a bit, but like the run types Baltimore relied upon this season were exactly the run types that Kansas City's run defense has been most vulnerable to, right? Like the counter stuff, the power stuff from shotgun. And the Ravens just, I thought were going to come into the game and be able to run, maybe not as well as everyone else thought, but they were just uber efficient with those run types. You couldn't really see a world where they were going to be stopped. And we saw like, hey, 4th and 1, we're going to use power from shotgun. The entire world knows it's coming on that opening drive touch. It's like, Lamar goes for 20. God, it felt like it should have been 60. I don't know what was going on there, but the Chiefs had struggled against those run types to where you thought Ravens would be fine, and all of a sudden they come out 69% pass on early downs in the first half. It was just staggering. To your point, you hit it perfectly. Monken played far too much zone early, allowed the heavy formations to give him some trouble, and it was something that we outlined that the Ravens' defense against heavy formation passes were like bottom 10 in the NFL, not elite to where their surface level ranking was. And we know Mahomes has torched zone, and the Chiefs have increased their rate of heavy formations during this little run they've had offensively. And so, it was horrific game plans on both sides of the ball for Baltimore. Lamar Jackson was atrocious. And I kind of say all of that to say, like, who wanted their Chiefs money line ticket if Zay Flowers doesn't fumble through the end zone? How much are you enjoying life with Chiefs plus 3.5, right? And so it's like, even if you include all of those things with horrific game plans, include the MVS 32-yard catch late to kind of put the nail in the Ravens' coffin, Baltimore outgained the Chiefs by more than a yard per play. The Chiefs did zip and pip in the second half offensively, and I think that's kind of the gauge. We know Mike McDonald went more man. The blitzes were a little bit different. He didn't let Kelsey just eat him alive. Sure, some of that was the Chiefs kind of going into a shell, but that's something they've done a lot this season, and that they can't afford to do that in the Super Bowl, I don't think. And I mean, it was one of the lowest scoring teams in the second half, I believe, third lowest on the season. So it's not shocking. It's hard to say this because they're in the Super Bowl and it's reading Mahomes, but it's like they put their best stuff out there, and I know they've scripted more plays than they ever have before. It's like they feel like they need to do that because the talent around Mahomes isn't quite there right now. But it's like once the script wears off, like once the movie wears off, so to speak, like it's not good enough everywhere else to kind of do it for a full 60.
How dare you cast aspersions at Matt Nagy and some of the in-game adjustments he's able to make, set up, and schematically develop as those games progress. And to your point, when you look at the way the Ravens went about approaching it, Todd Monken going pass happy should have been a game plan that Kirby Smart used in the SEC championship against the Alabama defense, and he should have swapped game plans to try to go run heavy like Georgia did against Alabama in that contest. But you're right. I mean, this is a Chiefs team, and the numbers don't lie. They're the reason they've been the most profitable under team in the second half this year. You look at how they haven't been able to muster points in the fourth quarter, and it's one thing that I know a lot of people are saying, well, they didn't have to come out of their comfort zone in that fourth quarter. Well, how do you explain losses earlier this year where they just couldn't find their mojo even in home games against inferior defenses? And to your point, I think it's definitely well documented that, look, I mean, you're going to get their best stuff early, and it's a question of what they can drop in the sandbox late. But to find those playmakers like they did 4 years ago when these teams met in a Super Bowl and a race in a double-digit deficit, I don't think that personnel is currently on the Chiefs roster.
I agree, and this isn't to like crap on the Chiefs, right? I mean, you got San Francisco who's backed their way into the Super Bowl. I mean, Dan
they
Campbell
needed Detroit to lose their mind
yeah.
and shoot themselves in the foot 1,000 times in the second half to even get here.
Yeah, I mean, and there's paths where, I mean, no, we talked about it where, the performance in the numbers wasn't as like staggering for the Packers as people thought watching that game. I thought San Francisco performed a little bit better than maybe what you watched on TV or the scoreboard said. But in saying that, there were certainly ways they would have lost to the Packers. And then, Dan Campbell in the NFC Championship game becomes the punching bag. But for me, maybe you can bash him for the run play and the timeout usage late. But I have no problem with a coach whose MO is aggression, and that aggression led to more than a projected extra win this season, doing what the Lions got them to that point doing, right? And players have to make plays. And so, Reynolds can't drop two balls, Gibbs can't fumble, J-Mo can't have a ball go through his hands. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, we're not just here crapping on the Chiefs. Like, San Francisco has certainly kind of backed their way into this game a little bit. And I think probably how you view how they've gotten here is probably the side you land, right? I mean, these are two teams, I think, to your very point at the top, have been atop of the league's power ratings at one point or another. And there's a reason why, this has fluctuated between 1.5 and 2.5 with a consensus of 2. And again, as we kind of lead into the deep dive of this game, something you've heard all too often from us this NFL season, the data points have been wonky. And so because of the wonky data points, like there's a battle here again. And the total is basically sat here at 47.5 for a long time. Maybe we see a little bit of under money trickle in here, but we've now had how many days since this line's been out? 47's a key, and there just hasn't been, a reason to dive into that number head first early on. So, I mean, I think if you're back on the Chiefs, it's pedigree, it's Reed Mahomes, having been there. It's the idea that the Chiefs maybe are a little bit better than we think. I know a lot of people aren't talking about this, Todd, but, the schedule, pretty crazy down the stretch. Not just facing Miami and Germany and not having like this great bye week, but you played the Eagles before their collapse, surging Packers team, Buffalo late, the Bengals, which was basically their season. The Chiefs were at massive rest disadvantages in all of those.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you face the Packers and Bills with massive rest disadvantages in the regular season. The Raiders and Bengals both had extra rest as well. And so maybe that's why some of the Chiefs' data points weren't great. And now you get the Chiefs with a much-needed 2 weeks. And I think if you like the 49ers, it's because of the season-long data, right? The larger sample. And if you're using the larger sample, that price probably more like 3 flat. If you're assessing these teams on an Excel sheet and weren't thinking about Mahomes and Reed and, the idea that San Francisco will not go away from the run. And on the surface, that should be a large advantage for the 49ers. I think maybe we'll think about that a little bit differently. But that's really like the 2-minute handicap here of like why we're seeing a battle on the side. And, now we have the ability to dig in a little bit more from the surface level stuff that I'm sure everyone's been hearing for the past week or two.
Right, and I think, your point when you mention some of those data points as well, strength of schedule. You look at what the Chiefs had to do to go through the AFC gauntlet, significantly more difficult on a week-in, week-out basis than what we've seen in the NFC this year, and it was something that we highlighted way back when in the preseason preview, that if you could get out of the AFC, that was going to be a much more challenging road, most likely. Now, some unlikely teams emerged in the NFC, but there's a reason that the 49ers found themselves as a touchdown-plus favorite in both of their playoff games, and were underwhelmed from odds makers' expectations in terms of their ATS results. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for the podcast, follow all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, you mentioned some of the underlying numbers, and we may as well get right into some of those things. And I think when we talk about this matchup, you mentioned Mahomes and Reed, and so it makes the most sense, in my opinion, to approach when Kansas City has the football, with Mahomes searching for his 3rd Super Bowl title. I mean, he talked earlier this week at Media Night. He says it's not necessarily the win that inspires him the most, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's just not feeling like they felt when they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the sheer disappointment of losing in a game of this magnitude. When we look at Mahomes, I mean, we know he accounts for a massive portion of the Chiefs' salary cap. It'd be the second highest Super Bowl winning quarterback all time, behind only Patrick Mahomes in 2022 that represented 17% compared to the 16.5%. He's been outstanding when it comes to protecting the football. I know a lot of people have talked, well, Mahomes has turned it over in the Super Bowl. A lot of those turnovers came in comeback mode when he was limited and had an offensive line that might have been better suited to have you and I out there blocking against that Tampa Bay defensive front. So keep all of that in the back of your mind. When we look at Patrick Mahomes this season, 6.5 air yards per attempt, it gives him the lowest league ranking, 30th in that department since 2018. I don't see that as a negative. I see that more as the Chiefs adjusting to the personnel, and it's a credit to the way that Mahomes has gone out there, led this offense, not putting up the gaudy numbers, but still giving this team a chance to compete for the biggest prize in the NFL. Travis Kelce has been his primary weapon, not just this postseason, but as long as those two have been on the same field. We've seen the emergence of Isaiah Pacheco, questions about the Chiefs' offensive line, and Joe Thuney being a long shot to play. I would be stunned if he's out there, so we're going to continue to work under the assumption that he won't be. But when we look at the Chiefs offensively, Payne, what are some of the biggest things that stick out to you in terms of what you want to see from this group on Sunday against the 49ers defense?
Well, I know we've done this in the past as kind of like breaking down the segments of the offense, right? The run game, the pass game. And I know we talked last night and you said Pacheco seems to be the guy who's
he's all the buzz
of, yeah,
all the rage between amongst the kids these days.
It's always interesting, as I kind of go in my silo and talk to my guys, and obviously, you're well connected, but you also get a dash of the public side of sports content, and so it's always interesting to hear the discrepancies there. Joe Thuney certainly a long shot, and I think that may hurt a little bit in this spot with the run game. I know everyone was kind of yammering about how great Allegretti was as a replacement leading up to the Ravens game, but then you look and he graded out horrifically in run blocking and gave up 4 pressures and a sack. So I think the loss of Tooney's pretty large, but Pacheco has an interesting matchup here. We've outlined the 49ers run defense. I feel like we've talked about every 49ers game for the last 2 months. So we know it's been leaky. Where it's been leaky is outside, right? We've kind of pounded the table specifically the last 2 weeks about how teams need to use the outside zone, right? Dual runs have hurt the 49ers. Steve Wilkes' defense has actually been damn good defending runs from guard to guard on early downs the first 3 quarters, and then you compile that with Tooney being out. So it's like, I think Reed's going to throw on the film. He's going to attack the tackles and the edges of the 49ers run defense, whether it's with Pacheco or the receiver run game. We know Tony's practicing. Does he play? I don't know. Sky Moore looking a little bit better to go here. So there are some options there to attack the edges. And if you look, the 49ers are top 5 in yards per carry allowed between the tackles. Dips all the way to 27th in success rate allowed when you run to the tackles and outside. All of that, I wouldn't say all of it, but you go back to an injury I think we outlined months ago, Hufanga. Right, how massive of a loss he was. He was one of the best run defenders and tacklers this 49ers defense had. And the way he flew around the ball certainly got him outside. So he was a huge part stopping some of those outside runs. I'm sure Andy Reid is just, completely dissected what the 49ers have put on film defensively. I know he's in tune with a lot of sharp analytics minds. There's a lot of connections to guys that will give him a great game plan. Let's put it that way. And it's not surprising if you think about what Reed's done this postseason. He's been able to identify the offensive strengths. He's upped the rate of outside runs in the playoffs, leaning more towards getting his guys outside. 51% of early down runs for the Chiefs have been to the perimeter. It's a 16% increase from the regular season. So they're already kind of doing what's been effective against the 49ers defense. Also, you mentioned, and I think we've talked about it a couple times now, but not maybe as precisely, but battle-tested, I think is the right describing word for the Chiefs. They faced a top 10 schedule of defense, run defense. So, it would be the least shocking thing if the Chiefs found some balance in the run game. Running from 3 wide formations would be smart for Reed as well. Early downs, first 3 quarters, the 49ers 29th in EPA defending runs outside. The Chiefs are more efficient and explosive running that way as well. So I do think there are some advantages here for the Chiefs if they're running it the right way, and it's really attacking those edges. I know, talked to a lot of 49er diehards. They do not perceive Chase Young, I think, the way others do.
You don't like the loafing that we've seen on video on videotape, where a guy who looks like he should be playing for his next contract is out for a Sunday stroll?
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that, but yeah. I mean, now listen, he's in a spot that effort should be mandatory, obviously, with the Super Bowl. So, listen, we know how you need to attack the 49ers. We really trust Andy Reid to attack them in that manner. And so it's very possible, certainly early on, the Chiefs have some success here. I'm not ready to pound Pacheco overs, to your point, because that seems to be a little narrative-y from the masses, and I don't necessarily love going over inflated numbers in the biggest game season. But there's certainly paths, let's put it that way, for Pacheco.
The interesting part about Pacheco, and when you look at his usage over the first couple of games of this postseason, we've seen it go up considerably. Week 17, high leverage spot, 93% of the snap share, 70% in the wild card round, 72% in the divisional, and 79% in the conference title spot. We know he's taken on a bigger role, but what I think is interesting about that is Pacheco's biggest rushing days have come when Kansas City is protecting a lead and they use him to bleed the clock. In neutral game states, it's not like they're going to lean on him as the primary bell cow. We've seen Andy Reid. He's got Patrick Mahomes, and it's Mahomes that's going to throw the ball, much like he did early on against the Ravens, to try and get things going. So I think it's a little bit of a dichotomy and a thought process there that a lot of people try and come in with that top line market. If they like the Chiefs, they back into some of their props. Whereas I've learned at your elbow and some of the sharpest guys out there that you can't do that, because if one thing goes wrong, the entire script that you've laid out kind of blows up in your face, and you're going to find, 8, 10, 15, 20 props that all go by the wayside just because the top line market doesn't come home. If the Chiefs...
I think you're like, and this is probably, we don't need to be teaching at this point in the season, but I think, obviously game state matters when you're thinking about these props. And that's, to me, why, and I hate to do this because you have Mahomes, you have Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. It's a star-studded game, but they're, at least from my perspective, and a lot of the sharpest guys that we speak to, like, there's not a lot here. And the job of the odds maker becomes far more easier when you have a game that's not on a key and you're getting two-way action, pricing all of the props mechanically on a pick'em game. There's just not as many edges, and that's kind of how I feel about it. And you said it perfectly, right? An odds maker's job in this game is point and click. They really don't have to do anything for this game, as crazy as that sounds, or substantially less work than you would think for a game that's not getting two-way action on a key number that's virtually around pick'em when you're pricing these props.
When we look at pass catchers for the Chiefs offensively, I mean, the numbers for Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are staggering. 3 career games against the 49ers. Kelce's been targeted 24 times. He's come away with 20 receptions, 255 yards, and a touchdown. Didn't exactly have a big banner day when these teams met in Miami in the Super Bowl, but has put up some numbers in the past. You can look at any which way you want to slice Mahomes or Kelce numbers. They're going to come out making those guys look like roses, and rightfully so. We've seen the emergence of Rashee Rice as a reliable wide receiver one. Still a rookie, but breaking all sorts of records and has shown an ability to be a high-volume guy. 6+ catches in 7 of his last 10 games overall, including 8+ catches in 4 of his last 5 games. Away from Arrowhead, we look at the yards after the catch. He checks a lot of the boxes there. If you're the 49ers defensively trying to take away what the Chiefs do, the one area that we've talked about for Kansas City is while they have good weapons, they don't have a volume of elite weapons as far as the pass receiving game is concerned.
Well, I mean, it comes down to kind of what we've said, and you mentioned Pacheco's usage moments ago, but it's very much early become the scripted offense, and they understand we got to get our horses the ball. So it's become like this 3-man game where we're putting it in Mahomes' hands, but when we throw it, it's Kelce, it's Rice. We're testing MVS to see if the hands are working that day, and for all the shit that he's gotten,
I'd love to know what that looks like. 3
of the biggest catches in the postseason so far for the Chiefs.
What does that look like, Payne? Do they put him in a batting cage underneath the stadium? They get the jugs gun going and go, yep, MVS has the good stuff today. We're going to target him early. Nope, he looks like Featherstone in Necessary Roughness. We're going to use him as a decoy and just run him deep on every ball to try and pull a safety away from over the top.
And that's the advantage of MVS. He doesn't need to catch the ball to be effective and create space for others because that speed is dynamic. But he's made, again, 3 of the biggest catches in the postseason. They've kind of fought the ball in some of them, but, I mean, they've been tough catches. So he would be a nice little added bonus for a game like this. I think when we think about the Chiefs' throw game here a little bit, it's like they have been using heavier sets, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the show. They went from a 36% usage in season, which was the 3rd highest rate, now all the way up to 45%. The playoffs, we saw it work against the Ravens, who, went from being an elite pass defense to a bottom 10 unit when defending heavy formation passes. The 49ers defense, a little bit different, right? It's a top 10 defense defending heavy formation throws. So for me, the key is breaking tendency. If you're Andy Reid, you have to have Patrick Mahomes throw with play action more. I understand that Mahomes is so elite that Reid doesn't think he needs that enhancement. But, I mean, Mahomes is Superman with play action, and I think we've mentioned this back-to-back weeks now. But since week 14, San Francisco dead last in EPA per pass allowed when quarterbacks throw with a play action element ahead. So I think about the last time these guys faced off in the Super Bowl was 2019. Chiefs, 49ers, Super Bowl 54. Mahomes threw with play action on 43% of passes. Now, they used it more, but it was a 9% increase season long that year. Mahomes only had about 17% this season. You need to see a higher rate with 2 weeks to prepare. Spike that play action rate. The 49ers, think about this. They've allowed 4.7 yards per pass attempt when teams don't use play action. Over 10 yards an attempt when you use play action since week 14. So you gotta spam that a little bit. 49ers defense has really struggled defending third down passes of late as well. Some of that has to do with the down and distance, but Mahomes needs to see manageable situations. I kind of like the idea, Todd, here as well of Kelce having 2 weeks off. We understand he's 34. He's not in his prime, but
don't
he's
make
not
fun of us
washed
old
like
guys
people
again, Payne.
thought.
Don't make fun of us old guys again.
No, I think the idea of Travis Kelce is kind of taken on a weird stance this season. It's like, we understand the guy isn't in his prime. He's 34 years old. He's not running like speed seam routes 28 yards down the field anymore. But having 2 weeks off for a guy like him is awesome. Because we've kind of seen, even in the Baltimore game, where he can't like go 100% every single snap. He seems to, take himself out of the game after a big play. But 2 weeks off is massive for him. Obviously, Fred Warner in the middle. The guys are an eraser on the inside. But formationally, you can do some things to drag him away from the tight end you're focusing on. And we saw last week Ben Johnson, especially early, when he would go with these 2 tight end sets, he'd have a lead tight end basically just run at Fred Warner. And Laporta would trail and find open space when they were thrown to the tight end in the middle of the field. So I think it's important to talk about the tight ends. Andy Reid has been spamming that position in the postseason. 42% of early down throws the first 3 quarters during the playoffs have gone to tight ends. When the Chiefs do use Kelce, I think it needs to be more outside. And I think that's where that added rest comes into play because, Warner, you start to look at what his ability is on the inside. And when you start to target tight ends between the numbers, the 49ers number 1 in EPA per attempt allowed to the tight end position.
Listen,
that number
go ahead.
dips all the way to 19 when throwing to tight ends outside the numbers. So, when I kind of put this in a big ball, like there's certainly a path here with Pacheco runs outside, some wide receiver runs outside, Kelce being used outside the numbers, and then obviously Mahomes going all magic man. He's faced elite pass rushers the last 2 weeks, and Mahomes has done very well, avoiding sacks and making plays there. And I think, not to go back, but a lot of that Chiefs' early success against Baltimore, no doubt they were methodical drives, but think about what was needed, right? 4th and 2, high variance, high leverage play. Mahomes finds Kelce on the back end. He's the last option in that read. Then you get the 3rd and 5 where Mahomes sees pressure, does like a figure 8 to get out of it, gets hit in the midsection, throws a flutter ball, and Kelce's diving for the grab. And so again, like I keep coming back to, it's like, even though the Chiefs built that lead early, it was like 2 massive late down variance plays that led to those points early. So yes, there are paths here. The 49ers defense has not looked great, but it'll be interesting to see what this offense looks like. But again, the good thing is there are some paths here for Andy Reid and the Chiefs to find against Steve Wilkes' defense.
And keep in mind, when we look at Kelce, he went well over his over-under for receiving yards against the Ravens that was set in the low 60s before that game even got midway through the second quarter. Odds makers aren't exactly dumb. That number's been jacked up nearly 10 yards in this particular game, and you have to imagine the public sees Travis Kelce. They know the narrative, and we'll see how high that number creeps up before there's a little bit of resistance on game day. But just listening to you describe Travis Kelce, I know we put one of country music's greatest stars to rest earlier this week in Toby Keith. It reminds me of a line there, Payne. I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was, and maybe that applies to Travis Kelce having 2 weeks to rest up heel. And should this be his last game, you go out on a high note with a prominent place in this Kansas City offense. You can follow Payne.
Do you remember, and I hate to cut you off, do you remember last season when we talked about Kelce? I mean, what's so interesting about these is, it's price. So like last year when we did the podcast, it was like, hey, even though it might feel square, it's probably sharp as hell to get out ahead early on Kelce and go over 6.5 because you're going to have an opportunity to come back. And if you had access to a couple outs, you had the ability to go over 6.5 early, come back late, 8 minus 40 under on game day on Kelce. And so I don't really know how we feel about this week's game with Kelce's props at 6.5, juiced massively over, some minus 170 in some spots. It's not someone we focused on. But in terms of like, hey, if you played Kelce, getting out ahead is never a wrong idea on key players in the Super Bowl like a Kelce if you are willing to say, hey, I'm going to come back at at a different price the other way and kind of build some potential middles.
Yeah, exactly. Build some positions, take a little bit of the gamble out of the biggest game, knowing that there is so much public money that won't enter the market, especially out here in the desert, until probably the 48 or 72 hours leading up to kickoff, as people figure out what they have left in the pockets, should the tables have been kind to them, and or some of the nightclubs and adult establishments that will no doubt do gangbuster business. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board related. You can follow the podcast at Bet the Board. And the fun does not end when the Super Bowl comes to a screeching halt on Sunday. Plenty of great NASCAR coverage to get you through the dog days of spring and summer. That podcast is Stay Green. We provide the same in-depth knowledge base for betting the cars on track as you've come to appreciate from us in college football, the NFL, and all the other sports that we tackle in a way that only Bet the Board does. Payne, when we look at the other side of the ball for San Francisco, this is an offense that can become their third Super Bowl champion to finish with the fewest passing attempts in the NFL since the 2005 and the 1966 Packers. It's a group that we've talked about at great lengths. They're tough to beat when they're at full strength. 15-1 straight up when Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel all play the entire game. 6-5 in all other games. This is a unit that's averaged 6.61 yards per play this season, the seventh best by any team in the Super Bowl era. None of the top 12 on the list, though, did go on to win a title. And for all of the things that people want to say about Brock Purdy being a game manager, Kyle Shanahan gets the best out of him. You look at what he did with Matt Ryan from a yards per attempt standpoint, Brock Purdy putting up gaudy numbers as well. And a lot of the reason because he leans on some unique offensive principles, motion being at the very forefront of what he does, looking to try and create mismatches. And we know this is the major milestone still missing from Kyle Shanahan's resume. He's no longer young and wet behind the ears as a 30-something-year-old head coach with unlimited potential. I'm sure he would love to be able to put his Mona Lisa on tape with this offense on full display. So when you begin to assess some of the matchup advantages or disadvantages that the 49ers will have offensively against the best stop unit that we've seen from Andy Reid in quite some time, and the mastermind that has been Steve Spagnuolo, and the adjustments he has made in the second half with a group that's allowing just 13.7 points per game this postseason versus opponents that combine to average nearly 28 points per contest during the regular season. How do you see things playing out here?
Well, I think if you're back in the 49ers, we talked about, you think it's going to be a landslide with CMC on the ground. And
give him 35 touches. He'll have the entire offseason to get that quad massaged.
So, probably makes sense to start with the run game. That seems obvious. And maybe our viewpoint's a little bit different. It's the area where if you're laying San Francisco here because you deem the price is short, the area where you need to effectively win this bet is on the ground. And, what we know is extremely likely, despite what Falcons fans will tell you, is Kyle Shanahan's not going to abandon the run. And we saw that in the NFC Championship. 49ers trailed. They were up against an elite Lions run defense, and CMC got 20 carries. 49ers had 31 non-kneel down runs. So he's not getting away from it. And kind of what's interesting to me is, and again, I kind of insulate myself. I don't really watch a bunch of TV and listen to radio and kind of see what some of the talking heads who don't bet are saying.
You're better off that way, by the way. Let me go on record and say that.
But Spags has seen the Shanahan offense. Saw it in the 2019 Super Bowl. Again, last season in San Francisco. CMC had 7 runs for 26 yards. The 8th run went for a 12-yard explosive. Game state certainly forced him out. 2019 Super Bowl. Moser, who was an efficiency monster in his prime, had 12 carries for 58 yards, one of which went for 17, right? So the other 11 for 31. Spags has shown an ability to not get completely ran over in these big games where it seems like his defense might. Just what was the conversation last year, right? It was, how are they going to stop the Eagles' run game? The trio of Sanders, Gainwell, and Scott are still in a milk carton somewhere. So I trust Spags so much that it's I don't necessarily see it as a complete landslide. You also have something that's a bit interesting here. I mentioned the Chiefs' run defense improving a little bit. Only think about running back runs since week 12. Chiefs are 6th, an EPA per rush against running backs. And then you take it a level further, right? Not just surface level, but diving deep. The run types. 49ers right now have been using a two-back run system on 55% of early downs. You think about, CMC and Juszczyk leading the way there. The only run type from those two-back sets that have actually produced positive EPA for the 49ers, outside zone. Other concepts have basically yielded negative EPAs. And people have heard me talk about this, and, they don't love it, but it's Trent Williams and 4 pylons. The 4 pylons survived by scheme. Kansas City has actually been above league average against these two-back outside zone runs. So it's I'm not insinuating like CMC and the 49ers ground game gets absolutely shut down here. I don't think that's the case, right? And there's been plenty of pro bettors hitting 49ers rushing props, right? We've seen Debo's rushing number over 13.5 get smashed. 49ers more rushing yards than the Chiefs, whether it was laying the yards or a hefty money line price. Heck, we even see a very sharp money on Elijah Mitchell's first rush attempt over 2.5 yards. The amount of carries he's going to have. What I'm saying is, though, again, every talking head you've likely heard or will continue hearing leading up to this game is going to tell you this is the area of the matchup that's going to be a landslide. And I'm just saying, I might not completely be on board with that thought process from Spags' history with multiple weeks, the 2 data points against Shanahan, the Chiefs' defensive run improvement, the run types, the fact the 49ers have faced the second easiest schedule of run defenses, and the Chiefs have faced, 3 consecutive top 5 run offenses and won all 3 games. That maybe, just maybe, the 49ers run game won't be, just completely run around over and through the Chiefs defense is kind of my thought there.
It's an interesting element to consider because you're exactly right. I think people who want to make a case for the 49ers believe that Christian McCaffrey has to have a big day, that he's got to run for 100 yards. He's going to carry the ball 20.
Well, he does have to have a big day. It's just a question of does he have it?
Right. Does he have it in him, and how they elect to try and get him those touches. I mean, we know he is the most dynamic playmaker that they have on this team offensively, but do you use the pass to set up the run? Do you try and disguise some of the things? And that's what Kyle Shanahan, and you brought it to our listeners' attention years ago, is one of the best when it comes to window dressing and trying to use some of those motion concepts. I would love to know if Kyle Shanahan wanted to pick the brain of Mike McDaniel and figure out what the Dolphins found success in doing when they broke down the tape, given the familiarity between those coaches, to try and see any competitive advantage that you have at your disposal. But for all the questions...
They didn't have much success, aside from the second half ground game in Germany. That was about it.
That's what I was going to say. You go back and watch those games, and you go, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what are the same concepts, knowing we came from the same coaching tree, figure out how you can innovate on some of that and provide those same looks, but with different end results. But, I mean, for the Chiefs, the run defense has been the question mark. The one constant has been that this group has been very good against the pass. And when you look at L'Jarius Sneed, you look at Trent McDuffie, they've contributed to a group that's allowing 16.8 points per game, the fewest by a Kansas City Chiefs team since 1997. They've allowed under 28 points in every game this season, the first team to do so in every regular season game since the 2011 49ers, and the first team in league history to do so in a 20-game span. Allowing less than 300 yards per game, fewest by Kansas City since 95, 8.6% sack rate, best mark for the Chiefs since 1992. Now, some of that changes without Charles Omenihu, who was one of the more unheralded signings that you brought to people's attention that I don't think anybody else outside of Kansas City was talking about. But when we look at Brock Purdy, he is the X factor. We know he's a lot more inexperienced than Patrick Mahomes, but he's been able to answer the bell in the clutch and come up with some big drives in the wins against the Packers and wins against the Lions. He has some weapons at his disposal. What does Kyle have to do to get Brock Purdy comfortable and allow Brock Purdy to cook if the 49ers passing game is going to have some success against unique looks that they're inevitably going to get when it comes to defensive back blitzes and other things that Steve Spagnuolo loves to scheme up?
Yeah, there's so many, and this is the fun part of the matchup, and it becomes the chicken or the egg all off of can San Francisco find its run game, on early downs as efficiently as people think? The goal for Spags is to make Brock Purdy a real factor. And another sharp prop that we have seen is Brock Purdy to throw an interception. It was even money. It's now out to -15, -20 in some spots. The Chiefs secondary, right, with Sneed and Trent McDuffie leading the way, has just been outstanding. And they're battle tested too. We're going to keep saying this. And, the Kansas City has played eight top 10 passing offenses. They've played those offenses to a top 5 level. it's been the inverse, right? The 49ers have played 4 games against top 10 pass defenses. Purdy has 8 interceptions in those games. Now, I understand some of his weapons have been out. Trent was down and Debo was down through some of those data points, but he's not really battle-tested either. Purdy has the 5th lowest rate of dropbacks against top 10 pass defenses this season. And so, to me, it's very interesting. He's faced the very easiest schedule of pass defenses compared to any other quarterback in the postseason. So again, like there's some schedule discrepancies here that certainly favor the Chiefs. If Shanahan's smart, and he is obviously, you put Brock Purdy in better situations on early downs. You don't want Brock Purdy passing on 3rd and 5+ routinely because the ground game isn't going as efficiently as expected on predictive early down runs. The Chiefs' blitz concepts with Spags are far more efficient getting home on 3rd down than they are early downs. So, I mean, it's very, very vital, I think, to get Brock Purdy comfortable. The Chiefs on early downs actually defending passes from heavy sets. They're not all world, still fringe top 10. And that's an area where, they probably don't get decimated by the pass, but it's at least a slightly better path to throw on the Chiefs. 49ers, I think, have to also up their rate of play action. It's just too low. The Chiefs' pass defense is an elite defending play action passes. This Todd is another interesting market here. Like, Debo seems to be the guy getting love from pro bettors as the go-to receiver for Brock Purdy. We've seen Jawan Jennings under 1.5 receptions come in. I think the thought of how L'Jarius Sneed, a bigger, physical, long-arm corner, and how that style matches up well against Ayuk has led to some sharp money fading Ayuk there with under 4.5 receptions as well. You mentioned the loss of Charlemagne Ayuk. That's huge for the Chiefs, right? He's so versatile, can play inside now. Missed 6 games due to that early season suspension and still had 8 sacks. He's chomping at the bit to go against his
a little
former
revenge
team,
game in this spot,
yeah.
baby. There is no doubt it was in the back of his mind when he chucked that helmet knowing he had torn up his knee.
Yeah, so I mean, Spags is really have to focus on taking advantage of the players up front, not named Trent Williams. This is certainly a money game for Chris Jones. He clearly has an edge inside against what the 49ers are rolling out there. The pressure doesn't always need to get home either. Put the long arms up. You think about the 49ers, they do like putting Purdy under center and taking those deep drops at times, which are really slow. We know he's a little bit shorter. Chiefs have to get their hands up, bats and balls there. So for me, it's throwing on early downs with Brock Purdy because that'll negate some of the pressure packages and efficiency that the Chiefs have had with that blitz. Throw on early downs from heavy with some play action. I think that'll set Brock Purdy up for a little bit more success as opposed to getting him in 3rd and 5+ and asking him to be a facilitator against, a very, I would say, just you think about what Spags does pre and post snap, the way he muddies and changes the picture and the blitzes that he sends. It could be a little bit troubling there. So what's crazy to me is kind of as I think about this game and we talk about it, I haven't bet the Chiefs. I don't really want a piece of the Chiefs. It'd be really interesting if Tooney and Amedehu were out there. It's like the idea that people are running to the Chiefs despite like 2 of their better trench players not being available is pretty wild to me. But I texted you something, I would say in the 4th quarter of Lions 49ers, and as I kind of put the final touches on my notes this morning, I said to you, it's like, boy, I kind of come back to what I said in that moment. It's like, I think the Chiefs match up a touch better with the 49ers than potentially they did the Lions. So it was really weird as I went through these matchups. I'm like, man, Chiefs kind of don't match up too badly here. But yet I'm not really running to the window here. So it's just kind of a weird game for me from a betting perspective. We kind of glanced over in conversation all of like the sharp props, and I don't know where you want to lead us, but we certainly have a prop as a best bet.
Yeah, we'll share that in a second. And I think, you laying out the case, it's fascinating because you're right. I do talk to folks that are, more of the talking head ilk. I have a number of friends who wouldn't describe themselves as professional bettors by any stretch of the imagination. And this isn't meant to take a shot at any of our listeners out there because by all means, you have to bet what you feel most comfortable with. But to kind of create a synopsis for some of the information I'm being fed, Payne, is people, when they put their head on their pillow Saturday night before Sunday's kickoff, feel a lot better having a ticket with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in their pocket than Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, who haven't won at this level. And I think in some way, shape, or form, win or lose Sunday afternoon, they're going to feel better going, all right, well, we went down with the best quarterback of the current generation and one of the best head coaches, and we just got beat. Whereas if you bet the 49ers and you're a recreational bettor and you lose, you go, I can't believe I didn't back Patrick Mahomes as an underdog, knowing that he's 373-1 ATS and has won 37 games outright, catching points. So you do have a little bit of that groupthink. You do have a little bit of a different thought process with a one-game sample size for people that do this and know it's the last football game that they're going to be able to bet until preseason starts in early August and the regular season commences with apparently a Thursday and Friday game to kick things off. So maybe we'll have to do Bet the Board live from, say, Apollo if we can get the funding to be able to make that happen for the Eagles game down in Brazil. But there are some of those elements that very much do. That very much, yeah. You'll pack a suitcase worth of Fiji. You'll be just fine down there. I'm not worried about it. Declaring that through customs. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thought process there. I mean, full disclosure from my side. Look, I'm sitting on some exposure to the 49ers for a bet that I made going into the divisional round. So that'll be my rooting interest at a much worse price than would be available on the money line now. Would I be running to the window to try and lay the price here on the 49ers, to your point? Probably not, but I'm not running over men, women, and children to bet the Chiefs either. But I do think it's going to be interesting in the 24 to 48 hours leading up to kickoff where some of these books will go. The ones that cater to a recreational customer base, the ones that are happier to take positions, knowing that they've dealt to sharper players. And even since we've started recording this morning, as I look at the odds screen, we've seen Jazz, Grande, and a couple of the more prominent PPH shops out there in the market go to 2.5. One of the sharpest shops out here in the desert's at 2.5. So I am very curious to see where we go. I don't think we're going to get to 3 because books don't need to create that exposure. But do we see other shops tick up from the 2 to 2.5? Do we see that money line rise? Or do we start to see a little bit more of that Chiefs support that you highlighted earlier on the show that was the first move from 2.5 as low as 1 before the market reached its equilibrium point at 1.5, 2? And these are the kind of chess matches that you see. And when there's one game and people have had 2 weeks to try and uncover every single angle of the game, I wish that we had a much more compelling argument to be made for side or total, but you have to lay out a little bit of the thought process, and I think it'd be disingenuous for all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners if we sit here and clamor for something, claiming it as a de facto best bet on side or total, knowing that we don't have exposure at current market prices. So with all of that being said, you mentioned a best bet and the prop market. A lot of these things have been on the move. We can't necessarily give them out in real time for a lot of listeners, but what may be out there to allow them to get a little bit of exposure to some of the sharpest stuff that we have in our portfolio so far?
Yeah, I think what you said was pretty eloquent there, and that
it's what happens when you don't make me record podcast at 6:30 local time. I get a chance to shake the cobwebs a little bit.
There's really some strong money on both sides of the game that I respect, and try to put this in a phrase without getting in trouble. I think I don't think we get to 3, even if
we do get to 3,
that is the
I would be stunned.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't be, knowing what I know.
So yeah, I mean that particular bettor has kind of been leaking it in. I would have said quietly, but it made its way to the desks of some people that I'm a little surprised that it got to the point where it kind of drew red flags to me. And maybe he's trying to get 3 on this game. But the point here is like there's a little bit of a battle going on there with the side, and I just I don't need to get involved in those. And to your point, I have a little bit of leverage on a number that became bad, although we thought we were going to take advantage of some books having liability towards the Bills and why that specific bet was being offered. But again, if I'd much prefer Zay Flowers having not fumbled there. We're probably free roll in this one.
Be in a much better spot. We may have actually already cashed it.
Yeah. So the total's interesting. I'll be honest. Our core number's lower. I usually don't divulge that, but like 47.5 is a touch high to us. Just pull a number off an Excel sheet We're actually below that key. So maybe if that's something that helps confirm your lean under. I get a little nervous about Super Bowls and how high scoring the second halves have been. And now, to me, it's kind of difficult. And I've also heard if this was to get on the other side of the key number, there'd be a buy order on the over. So it's like a little bit of potential battle on the total as well, with both sides potentially navigating the good side of the key of 47. So we'll see kind of how that potentially plays out leading up to kickoff over the next, what is it, we're recording here on Wednesday. How many days is that? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so 4 days, 5 days, something like that. Yeah, 4 days. So it'll be interesting to see if that battle materializes, if you do get that under money that I kind of would think would come in based upon our model, but then hearing a buy order that's potentially on the over if this was to get on the other side of 47. So it's just kind of been weird there. Long and short here is we have a prop best bet.
That was a long-winded, circuitous way to get to the finish line there. There's the tortoise and the hare, and the tortoise typically wins out, so we're giving you the benefit of the doubt. You've earned that level of respect.
I appreciate that. And I've also had 2 weeks off, so I feel a little re-energized. We don't have to say, let's get the hell out of Dodge here quickly. It's amazing.
That's coming.
What happens
It's coming
when you don't
soon.
record 4 shows and have your head down in the market for 12 to 16 hours a day on top of that, doing this stuff. So
get out, get fresh air, be a normal human for a day or two.
Yes. I will say, though, it was a late night. Someone very influential, potentially of the opposite sex, converted me to the glass bottle Evian, and not the Fiji out of the plastic bottle.
Most people get themselves in trouble with a spirit. You get yourself in trouble with bottled water, so it should explain plenty about your...
Very, very, very nice cocktail waitress. Okay.
I'm wondering how many other tangents we're going to go on before we wrap things up around here. So the floor is yours. I mean, that's the luxury we have. There are no time constraints or guardrails.
Ayuk, under 4.5 receptions, minus $1.40, is the official best bet, right? I think from a game state perspective, we expect this game to be tight. We expect Kyle Shanahan not to get away from the run. You think about the Chiefs' pass defense. Think about the matchup with Snead. To me, I know the yards have also been hit under here. That opened a touch short relative to past pricing, right? It opened 63.5, 62.5, which is about 5 yards lower than the average price of what Ayuk's been dealt here in the last month or so. So there was that adjustment built into that number for the Chiefs defense and the matchup, not so much on the reception side. And so I preferred the receptions. Plus, we know the way L'Jarius Sneed and the Chiefs like to play aggressively. It's very feasible that potentially Ayuk wins one of those one-on-one battles deep down the field and hits explosive. This kind of removes yourself from that potential, one catch for 48 yards kind of thing. So to me, Ayuk under 4.5 receptions minus $1.40 is one that we bet already. That was, one of the better ones in our portfolio. The number still is there. And it said, hey, go beat me, right? Go post five receptions against L'Jarius Sneed in a game state where Kyle Shanahan's going to run against a very good pass defense. And, again, go and get 5 and beat me. That's kind of our philosophy on that one.
Hey, a lot of things to try and comb through. I know you and the boys do as an extensive a job as there is. It's not always some of the math-based stuff that guys will dig into in terms of laying prices. We could sit here on this podcast and claim that no safety was going to be our best bet at minus $11. That's never been the kind of show that we run or operate. So Brandon Ayuk, widely available, 4.5 receptions under the total at minus $1.40.
In saying that, right, there's nothing wrong with laying juice.
Oh, absolutely not, as these prices come down. The thing is,
yeah,
I will say, the market has changed. When I was behind the counter, what feels like eons ago, I had a book manager, supervisor, whatever the hell you want to call him, that had no idea what was going on. He used to look at the red figures and panic. I go, why do we need to take money back on any of these things? Lo and behold, you get a safety in the first quarter of the Super Bowl. He looks like an absolute genius because he doesn't have to pay out, all the recreational bettors and takes it back. But, the sharper books haven't been one to kind of take that overtime number and bring it down to the no at minus $6 like we saw years in the past. They kind of hang it and forget it. So it's been tougher to get even some of those cents and dollars on the mathematical edges that might be there for the long shot bets.
Yeah, and one specific to this Super Bowl, and if you're listening as a recreational bettor, I'm not suggesting you go and bet this because you don't want to lay $3+ in a one-game setting, so to speak. But for a professional bettor who is simply price-oriented and has built out an entire portfolio, we understand, hey, if I can lay $3 and the price should be $4.50, like, I'm okay doing that. And one of those props in this game was, will both teams have a lead in the fourth quarter? No, it was minus 320. There was a pretty large mispricing in that. It's obviously moved up since that time, but that's just one example, Todd, of like, hey, like, no problem getting out there and laying a price. Not going to go like a $4 favorite out on a podcast. And again, not suggesting like you go and run and do that. If you're just kind of listening in a casual bettor and you're kind of just firing this up for the first time and you want a few bets on the Super Bowl, but just kind of doubling down in your stance there. It's like, the price. If I can lay $5 because something should be 11, like, shouldn't be running away from that just because it costs a little bit more vig, so to speak.
And especially when you're doing this on a day-to-day. I think a lot of people get caught up in the finality of the Super Bowl. They feel that the money is somehow greener. That's won on this game for folks that do it recreationally, and that can't be the viewpoint that professionals take. I mean, $1 won or lost in the Super Bowl will be the exact same on a SWAC college basketball game later in the week, an NHL first period, or whatever other pursuits that you have in your portfolio. So I think you have to look at it that way, and everybody comes at it through a very different lens in terms of what they're trying to achieve from their sports betting standpoint. So, hey,
they mean that size of the game is a half unit play in week 7 is not different than a half unit play in the Super Bowl. I was told otherwise.
Well, no, I mean, what you weren't told, Payne, is that a half unit play in week 1 has to become a 300 unit mega whale by the time you get to the Super Bowl to try and be able to achieve those goals. But hey, another great season in the books. Of course, the game has yet to be played, but I know all of the guys and girls out there. Want to thank everybody that tunes in each and every week. This is a labor of love for us. I mean, it starts in May, when we cover some of the aftermath of the draft and free agency, the preseason previews, the win totals, the player props, the 2 shows a week. I mean, we had a pinch hitter that filled in and did so quite admirably this year in Billy, who a lot of you have grown comfortable reading his work on the Bet the Board website, who stepped in on the podcast, and we'll try and incorporate him a little bit more. Our producer doesn't get enough credit behind the scenes, and I butcher his name all the time, and I'll probably do it again just to piss him off as he sits here and listens. So a shout out to David Gascon for all of his help and everything he's been able to do to take this shows to new levels here. And
Gascon, he's French. I didn't know that.
Gascon, Gascon. I mean, I'm going to call him everything under the sun. So when he listens here, he's going to use every 4-letter word to heave in my direction.
Yeah, I just call him DG. Feels like a pristine clothing brand, right? Dolce & Gabbana. That's what I call him,
that
DG.
Works. And the one final thing that we'll do before we close up shop, for all of you guys and girls that have tuned in each and every week throughout the season, rate, review, subscribe, go on iTunes, 5-star rating. We appreciate all the feedback, the interaction, the support that you guys show, and that's the single best way that you can help spread the Bet the Board gospel, get the podcast in front of more and more listeners, and allow us to continue to grow and expand the brand as we'll enter into, season 10? Theoretically coming up, a venture that we thought was going to be a season or 2 at best, and here we are putting a bow.
September 2014. I believe it was Packers Seahawks. Thursday Night Football was our first NFL podcast. I believe we just completed season 10.
Amazing. So completed season 10. I don't know. They all blend together. The quality time that we get to spend together on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays all fall. Anything else that you would like to share with our loyal listeners about your Super Bowl plans, festivities, how many grilled wings you'll try and eat from a chosen establishment, or do you lock yourself in a room when you watch a game of this magnitude?
Definitely gonna go with some wings. There's no doubt about that. So we have a little money, as you kind of referenced, on a bad. Well, I would say bad. It was good in the moment.
It was outstanding going into championship Sunday.
The game was fucking 50 cents. The bet was 50 cents off. So it was a great bet at the moment. And then whatever the Ravens did, whatever they did kind of hurt the edge there a little bit. So we have some liability to the 49ers in saying that, right? For all my card guys, I know I'm leveraged in Mahomes, and if he were to win this, probably, potential six-figure uptick there. So it's like I'm going to watch this one probably just rooting for props, honestly. I have no I think I'm good either way.
It's the best way to go in, no matter what the outcome is.
Yeah.
You put yourself in a better position.
You keep behaving over this, I'm going to hop out the balcony here and pee on you here in a little bit.
No, we don't need any of that. We don't need any candid shots or anything along those lines. So again, thanks to all you guys and girls out there for listening, tuning in, sharing the podcast with your friends, family, coworkers, colleagues, people you don't like, and everybody else under the sun. Want to wish all of you the best of luck with whatever investments you have in your portfolio on Super Bowl Sunday, and most importantly, from a bet the board perspective, with an under 4.5 receptions on Brandon Ayuk, ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window for the final time in football season 2023 and 24.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.